Tom woke up a little before the alarm and lay for a while, listening to the familiar sounds of New York outside his bedroom window. In the distance, the morning traffic hummed steadily. Hundreds of cars flowed through Manhattan, hurrying to start a new workday. Nearby, half covered with a blanket, Sarah, a slender brunette with pretty features, slept peacefully. He smiled, looking at her calm face even after 5 years of marriage. Tom still wondered how lucky he was to meet such a woman. Finally, the alarm went off quietly, and Tom turned it off carefully, trying not to wake Sarah. She could sleep some more. Her schedule was more flexible than his. Tom, as usual, started his morning with a shower and a short jog in the nearby park. Their house, a cozy red brick townhouse in the Brooklyn Heights area, was on a quiet street, and a small park was just a stone's throw away. Returning from his run, Tom inhaled the aroma of freshly brewed coffee. Sarah was already in the kitchen, in a light robe, holding a cup. Hearing her husband's steps, she turned around and smiled radiantly. "Good morning, darling. How was your run?" "Wonderful." Tom kissed her cheek and reached for his mug. "The weather is great, not too hot. I think it's going to be a productive day." Sarah poured him coffee. "I'm sure everything will go well for you. You're the best." Tom chuckled. "I'll try to live up to it." They had breakfast together, scrambled eggs and toast. It was sunny outside, the rays playing on the brickwork of the houses opposite. Tom was looking through the news on his tablet, glancing at his wife from time to time. Sarah was absent-mindedly leafing through a glossy magazine, but suddenly put it down and, frowning slightly, asked, "Have you forgotten that Marco is having dinner today?" Tom slapped his forehead. "Damn, I completely forgot about it. Thanks for reminding me. Today is Thursday. Yeah, of course I remember. At their house at 7 in the evening, right? Yeah, Marco and Lena will be glad to see us. Don't be late, okay? I'll try to get out of the office on time," Tom promised. He worked late often. His job as a financial analyst for a large company required him to work overtime, especially before quarterly reports. Sarah understood this, but still tried to make sure that her husband was not completely consumed by work. When breakfast was over, Tom went back upstairs to change. Sarah came up to him and straightened his tie. "You look like a real businessman," she joked, admiring her husband, a tall, athletic, dark-haired man with an open smile in a formal dark blue suit. "It's all thanks to you," he replied. "Without your sense of style, I'd be wearing whatever." Sarah smiled and kissed him on the lips. "See you in the evening." "See you in the evening, my love." Tom left the house and headed for the subway station. The morning sun gilded the tops of Manhattan's skyscrapers on the horizon. He descended into the slightly stuffy tunnel of Clark Street Station and soon found himself standing in a subway car, lost among dozens of other passengers, some engrossed in a book, some on their phones. Tom thought about the day ahead. A couple of meetings with clients, preparing reports. Nothing out of the ordinary. However, the day had a surprise in store for him. Closer to lunch, when Tom had just finished a meeting and sat down at the computer to check his email, he noticed an unread letter from an old acquaintance, David Harper. Tom's heart skipped a beat. They hadn't seen each other for a couple of years, although they corresponded from time to time. David had been his best friend in college, so many memories connected them. Tom opened the letter immediately. David wrote that he had big changes in his life and was going to New York on business. At the end was a question. Would Tom and Sarah have a free corner for a couple of weeks while David sorted out his business in the city? Tom thought about it. They did have a guest bedroom upstairs, which they rarely used except when relatives came to visit, and Sarah had always been open to visitors. He knew she liked David, even though she didn't know him well. They had only met a few times at senior parties, and David had mentioned big changes in his letter, which, whatever that meant, didn't sound very encouraging. Maybe he needed some support. Tom dialed Sarah's number. "Hello," her cheerful voice came through the receiver. "Hi, darling. Listen, here's the thing. David wrote to me, 'Do you remember my friend from my student days? David Harper?' Of course I remember. Tall and a great joker. How is he?" It seems not very. He mentioned that he is going through a difficult period at the moment. He is planning to come to New York and is looking for a place to stay for a while. Oh, Sarah's voice was sympathetic. He split up with his wife, right? You said he was having problems in his marriage. True, it seems that it is now final. Anyway, I was thinking, maybe I should offer him our guest room. Of course, Tom, it's not even up for discussion, Sarah responded immediately. Your friend needs help, we are obliged to support him. Besides, it will be interesting to get to know him better. Tom felt a warm wave of gratitude towards his wife. He had no doubt that Sarah would agree, but it was nice to hear. Thank you, darling. That's what I'll tell him then. I love you. And I love you too. Good luck at work. After hanging up, Tom immediately wrote a reply to David's letter, inviting him to stay with them for as long as needed. A few hours later, a grateful message arrived. David was pleased and was planning to come this weekend. That evening, on the way home, Tom told Sarah the latest news while driving their dark blue sedan. They decided to drive to a friend's house for dinner to avoid being tied to late-night train schedules. He's arriving on Saturday afternoon, Tom said, turning the steering wheel. I think I'll have to meet him at the airport. I could come with you, Sarah offered. Poor David must be pretty broken after the divorce. He'd be glad to see some friendly faces. Yeah, that's a good idea. Tom glanced at his wife. Thank you for taking it that way. I know the plans changed suddenly. Sarah shook her head. Stop it. Nonsense. That's what friends are for. Around noon on Saturday, Tom and Sarah were waiting in the arrivals hall at JFK. The crowd from the Los Angeles to New York flight was beginning to trickle out through the glass doors. Tom scanned the faces until he spotted a familiar figure. David was pushing a suitcase and looked tired, his face drawn, his cheekbones stubbled, his eyes dull. But when he saw Tom, he smiled. Tom hugged his friend tightly. It's been a while. Glad to see you, although it's a pity that it's under such circumstances. David smiled at the corner of his mouth. Glad to see you too, old man. He nodded slightly embarrassedly to Sarah. Hello, Sarah. Thank you for agreeing to host me. Sarah smiled softly. What are you saying, David? We're happy to help. It's probably not easy for you right now. David looked down. Perhaps so. But I hope that everything will work out. The three of them walked out to the parking lot and soon were driving home. David looked out the car window at the city running past the glass. I haven't been to New York for a long time, he said quietly. I missed these views. Now we'll have a chance to catch up, Tom answered cheerfully. We'll show you a couple of cool new places, some restaurants. Thank you, friends, David responded. You are so kind. I don't know what I would do without you. Don't thank me, Sarah said, turning to him from the passenger seat. We're really glad you're here with us. You'll see, everything will work out. Tom saw David smile weakly in the mirror. He looked older and somehow lost. Tom knew only superficially about the divorce. He remembered that David and his wife had been having problems for a long time. He had heard about the quarrels. But he didn't know the details, and he didn't want to pry now. There would still be time for a heart-to-heart talk. Arriving at the house, Tom helped David with his things. Sarah bustled about, showing her guest their cozy guest floor, a small bedroom overlooking the street, an adjoining bathroom. I hope you'll be comfortable, she said. If you need anything, just say so, don't be shy. David put the suitcase next to the bed. Thanks, Sarah, and you, Tom, you're lifesavers. Make yourself at home, Tom replied. Feel free. Sarah and I are going to leave you to unpack now, and then I think we'll have a cup of coffee. How about that? With pleasure, David nodded. Left alone with his wife in the kitchen, Tom said quietly, He certainly doesn't look like much. I feel so sorry for him. Sarah nodded sadly, taking out the coffee cups. Yes, he's like a shadow. The poor guy must have been through so much. We need to take care of him, Tom. Of course, Tom agreed. Let him rest and get used to it. I hope our company will do him good. Half an hour later, the three of them were sitting in the living room with steaming cups. Soft daylight was pouring in through the window. David had already showered and was looking a little more cheerful. He was telling in general terms how he had left his apartment in California with his wife while he took a leave of absence from work. "I just needed a change of scenery," he sighed, looking at the dark brown coffee in his cup. "And thank you, really. I didn't mean to impose, but I really don't have anywhere in New York to go right now." "Stop it," Tom waved his hand. "We're glad to have company. After all, how many years have passed, huh? So much time has flown by since our student days." "That's true," David replied, smiling crookedly. "And do you remember our dorm in our second year? How would we sneak pizza in at night?" Tom laughed. "Of course, the commandant almost caught us then." Sarah watched them with a soft smile. "I love listening to your stories. Tom rarely talks about his student pranks." "Because he has something to hide," David squinted playfully. Tom shook his head. "Hey, don't slander." All three laughed. The atmosphere lightened a little. That evening, when the guest had gone to bed early, Tom and Sarah were alone in the bedroom. Tom noticed that his wife was looking thoughtfully ahead. "What are you thinking about?" he asked quietly, hugging her. Sarah sighed. "It's just David. He's in such a bad way, you can tell. I keep wondering what it's like to lose so many years of marriage." Tom patted her on the shoulder. "We can't understand this, I hope, but we can help him get over it. You are very kind, you know." Sarah smiled sadly. "I want to believe that our warmth will heal him at least a little." "Of course," Tom whispered and kissed her. "Everything will be fine." Sarah nodded, leaning close to her husband. She had no idea how difficult the path they were all about to take would be. A few days had passed since David had moved in with Tom and Sarah. Life had gradually settled into a new routine. Tom still ran off to work in the mornings, and Sarah spent more time at home or traveling to meetings with clients. She worked as an interior designer and often planned her own schedule. Now, a new element had appeared in her daily routine, caring for the guest. On Monday, staying at home, Sarah decided to cook something tasty for lunch for her and David. She noticed that David was eating poorly, apparently due to stress. He had almost lost his appetite. So Sarah wanted to spoil him a little with home cooking. By midday, the kitchen was already fragrant with her signature vegetable soup and chicken pie. David came downstairs, drawn by the aromas. "God, it smells so good," he said embarrassedly. "To be honest, I was going to have a sandwich. I didn't think you were trying so hard." "Nonsense," Sarah waved her hand, putting the plates on the table. "I was free anyway, and I prefer to dine in company than alone." They sat down at the table in the bright kitchen. A ray of sunlight fell on a bowl of fruit. David tried the soup and raised his eyebrows in admiration. "Incredible, so delicious. Sarah, you have the talent of a chef." "Thank you," she smiled. "I'm glad you like it. Enjoy." They ate in silence for a while. Sarah watched her guest sideways. David's face still looked tired, and there were shadows under his eyes. But today he was lightly shaved and combed and wore a clean shirt, no longer the rumpled traveler they had met at the airport. It seemed as if the comfort and peace of their home were beginning to have a beneficial effect on him. "Sarah," David suddenly spoke quietly, putting down his spoon, I really don't know how to thank you and Tom. You've accepted me as one of your own." "Don't be silly," she said softly. "What did we do? We gave you a room. We fed you. That's natural. You're a friend." "It means a lot to me." He looked away from the window. "After everything that happened, to be honest, I felt empty, like no one needed me." Sarah sympathetically covered his hand with hers. "You are needed. You have friends. Tom values your friendship very much. He told me so much about you." David smiled sadly. "Is it true?" "Of course. Do you know how his eyes light up when he remembers your pranks?" David chuckled slightly. "Yes, that was true. Tom was actually a model student, but sometimes we were naughty too." He was lost in his memories for a second and then sighed. It's a pity that we've grown apart since then. Life has separated us. But now there's a chance to catch up, Sarah encouraged him. True friendship doesn't go away, even if you see each other less often. David nodded and looked into her eyes again. Thank you too for being like this. Caring, kind. Tom is a lucky guy. Sarah felt herself warm at these words, a slight blush touching her cheeks. I'm just trying to help, she said quietly. I'm truly sorry you had to go through a divorce. David looked down at his plate. He seemed to hesitate whether to speak or not. Then he said quietly, we lived together for 7 years, and everything went to hell. My ex, Catherine, met someone else. We had constant fights for almost a year. In the end, she said that she fell out of love with me. And he stopped, shaking his head. Sorry, I don't want to burden you with my problems. Don't apologize. If you want, talk it out. Sometimes it helps. David smiled bitterly. I doubt it will help. But thank you, Sarah. He fell silent, and for some time they finished their dinner in silence. Sarah felt a lump in her throat from pity. Such a kind, witty man and so much pain in his voice. She decided that at any cost she would help him to lift his spirits. After lunch, Sarah suggested they walk to the store for some fresh bread and fruit. David readily agreed it was clearly good for him to get some fresh air. They walked along a cozy Brooklyn Heights street, past rows of neat townhouses. It's a beautiful area, David remarked, looking at the greenery-covered porches of the houses. You and Tom are great to live here. We like it here ourselves, Sarah responded. It's quiet, calm, and it's half an hour to the center. I'm happy for you, he said honestly. It looks like you have a wonderful life. You're happy, right? Sarah looked at him a little surprised. Of course we are happy. Why do you ask? David shrugged. I don't know. I'm just curious. I'm happy for my friend. He found his happiness. Not everyone can do that. You will find it too, Sarah said softly. Believe me, there is something good waiting for you ahead. You just have to get through the dark period. They went into a small supermarket. While Sarah was choosing ripe avocados and tomatoes, David carried the basket and jokingly commented on her pickiness. You're a real fruit inspector. I'd pick the first one I came across. Sarah snorted. No way. Then I would complain about the unripe avocado. I'm a perfectionist when it comes to food. Tom must be pleased, David smiled. You feed him well. I'm trying to keep up appearances, she smiled. When they returned home with their purchases, Sereno's good mood was slightly dampened by the discovery of a leak under the kitchen sink. A small lake had formed on the floor. It's that pipe again, she sighed, turning off the water and getting out some rags. I've been asking the plumber to come for a month now, but nothing. Let's see, David suggested. He rolled up his sleeves and peered into the cabinet under the sink. Sarah was on all fours next to him, holding a flashlight. It turned out that the pad had leaked. Do you have tools? David asked. There should be a box in the pantry. I'll bring it now. Half an hour later, the pipe was temporarily put in order by David's efforts. He wiped his hands and smiled. I hope it will last until the plumber arrives. Sarah looked at him gratefully. You're just a jack of all trades. Thank you very much. I would never have managed it myself. Nonsense. Glad to be of service, he waved it off, but it was clear that he was pleased by her praise. That evening, when Tom returned from work, he was greeted by the smell of a freshly cooked dinner and the sound of animated voices coming from the kitchen. He found Sarah and David laughing about something. Oh, here comes our breadwinner, Sarah announced, rising to kiss her husband. Dinner's almost ready. Hi, Tom hugged her and nodded at David. How was your day? Very good, David answered for both of them. Sarah baked a wonderful pie today, and we also dealt with the leak under the sink. Really? Tom was surprised. What leak? It was just a leaky gasket, Sarah explained, but David fixed it. Tom patted his friend on the shoulder approvingly. Well done, you helped me out. I never got around to it. At dinner, Tom told the latest news from the office. David made jokes. Sarah gave her guest more, assuring him that he needed to gain strength. The atmosphere became truly family-like. For a moment, Tom caught himself thinking that he and Sarah seemed to have acquired another member of the family, practically a brother. This thought pleased him. Later that night, as he and his wife were getting ready for bed, Tom said, "You know, I think David is on the mend. He looked better today." "I noticed that too," Sarah smiled in the darkness. "He was even joking. He just needs time and friendly participation." Tom hugged his wife. "You are my miracle. You do so much for him." "Nothing special," she objected. "I'm pleased with myself." "He's good." "Yes," Tom agreed quietly. "It's good that he's with us." A few minutes later, Tom was already snoring, falling asleep after a long day. Sarah lay with her eyes open for a while. She remembered how she and David had laughed at her pickiness in the store that day, how he had carefully fixed the pipe, frowning in concentration. "Tom is right," she thought. "It's good that he's with us. It's right." With these thoughts, she also fell asleep, not suspecting that someone else was still awake in the next room. David stood at the window of his guest bedroom, looking out at the lights of the city at night. A complex range of emotions flitted across his face. He muttered something quietly under his breath, just a few words, and the reflection of a distant street lamp gleamed in his eyes. Then he slowly pulled the curtains down and went to sleep. The following week, Sarah planned to attend an evening reception at a small art gallery in Manhattan. A good friend of hers, the gallery owner, was inviting interior designers and architects to the opening of a new contemporary art exhibit. Sarah had originally planned to go with Tom, but on Wednesday it became clear that her husband would not be able to make it. An unscheduled late-night meeting was scheduled at work. "Darling, it's okay," she said to Tom on the phone that afternoon. "I'll go myself, don't worry." "I'm sorry," Tom sighed. "You were so looking forward to this vernissage, and now I'm stuck in the office again." "Really, it's okay," Sarah repeated. "Work is work. We'll get out together. I'll try to repay the debt and take you to a restaurant on the weekend," Tom promised more warmly. "I love you." "And I you." After the call ended, Sarah thought for a few minutes. She didn't really want to go alone at such events. Everyone usually chats, discusses the exhibition. It would be nice to have company. An idea suddenly occurred to her. Why not invite David? It might distract him, and she wouldn't be bored. David was late that day on business. He had gone out in the morning to meet a former colleague, hoping to sound out the waters for a new job in New York. He returned after lunch, and Sarah could tell from his expression that the meeting had gone so-so. "Well," she asked sympathetically, "any chance?" David shrugged. "Not yet. Nothing concrete. But never mind, I'll keep looking." He tried to act cheerful, but Sarah could see that anxiety was growing inside him. He was an active person, not used to sitting idle for long periods of time. "Listen," she said, handing him a mug of tea. "I'm going to a vernissage this evening. It's some kind of get-together of designers, artists. There will be interesting people, a buffet. Would you like to join me?" David was slightly surprised. "Me? Are you sure I won't be a nuisance? This is your professional get-together, after all." "Nonsense. There will be friends there. You can just enjoy the art and wine. Otherwise, you sit here alone all day. At the same time, you'll have some fun." David hesitated, but then smiled. "You know, I think I agree. I think it wouldn't hurt to take a break." "Great," Sarah said happily. "It starts at 7, and we leave at about 6. Will you have time to get ready?" He chuckled. "I haven't forgotten how to go out that much. I'll put on my best jacket and try to look presentable." By 6 o'clock, Sarah was downstairs, dressed and ready to go out. She had chosen a figure-flattering, dark green knee-length dress and put on her favorite silver earrings. David was already waiting for her in the hallway. He had managed to shower and get dressed. Dark trousers, a light gray shirt, and a dark jacket. It was the first time Sarah had seen him in anything other than jeans and a t-shirt, and she couldn't help but notice that he looked very attractive. Which is not surprising, she added silently. Tom always said that David was the coolest guy on campus. You look great, David said, looking at Sarah with warmth in his eyes. Thank you, she said, feeling a slight blush creep up her cheeks. You're gorgeous, too. Such a gentleman. David chuckled. An aging gentleman, perhaps. Nonsense. You're still young and good-looking. She shook her head. Well, shall we go? They called a taxi, and in half an hour, they were in Manhattan at the Gallery building. A respectable crowd had already gathered inside. Soft jazz music was playing. Guests with glasses of wine in their hands were discussing the exhibition avant-garde sculptures and installations. Sarah found herself in her element. Soon acquaintances were approaching her and starting conversations. She introduced David as a family friend. He was confident, greeted everyone politely, and joked occasionally. Sarah realized with relief that she had not been mistaken for David. This was indeed a distraction. He was casually talking to an artist about contemporary trends and later discussed real estate pricing with a Brooklyn architect. An hour later, when the formal part came to an end, the lights were slightly dimmed and the background music became a little louder and more rhythmic. Many guests were simply chatting or dancing with glasses in their hands. Sarah went out of the hall to the terrace to get some air and admire the view of the night city. Soon David appeared there, carrying 2 glasses of champagne. Here's the catch, he said with a smile, handing her one. How do you like the exhibition? Quite interesting, Sarah replied, taking a sip. Some of the work is quite impressive. Thanks for joining me. Thank you for inviting me, David countered. I'm having a great time. You were right, I should have left the house. Sarah looked at him in the moonlight and couldn't help but notice that he looked almost happy now. His eyes sparkled with lively interest. No trace of melancholy clouded his face. She felt proud, as if this was her achievement. You're like a different person today, she said softly. I'm glad. David took a sip of champagne, not taking his eyes off her. You know, Sarah, you are an extraordinary woman. Your kindness, and you yourself, it's something amazing. I haven't breathed so easily in a long time. Sarah looked down, embarrassed by such directness. You're exaggerating. I just wanted to help. No, he shook his head. I'm not exaggerating. Tom is a very, very lucky man to have you. We are lucky to have each other, she said sincerely. Yes, David responded, slightly muffled. Lucky. He paused, and for a moment there was silence, broken only by the hum of distant traffic. Sarah looked at the lights of the skyscrapers ahead. Suddenly, she felt David gently draping his jacket over her shoulders. You're shivering. It's cold. Sarah didn't even notice that she was actually cold. She smiled. Thank you. Yes, the evening turned out to be cool. David stood very close, his warmth enveloping her. Sarah suddenly felt her heart beating faster than it should. There was nothing wrong with that. It was just her husband's friend, a good acquaintance, making sure she wasn't cold. But why did she feel so hot? She decided to go back inside, fearing her own confused reaction. Looking at David, she said calmly, Shall we go to the hall? I haven't looked at one installation yet. David raised an eyebrow slightly, as if he realized something, but said nothing, only took a step back. Certainly. They spent another half hour at the vernissage, but Sarah was no longer as focused on the art as usual. Her thoughts returned to the scene on the terrace, to David's voice, to his gaze. She had to pull herself up several times. Stop it. He was just grateful. Don't make things up. Nevertheless, a slight excitement settled in her chest. They sat side by side in the taxi on the way back. The streets outside were ablaze with shop window lights. Sarah tried to make small talk, asking David what he liked about the exhibition. He answered eagerly, discussing one sculpture, then sharing that he had been interested in photography in his youth. The conversation flowed smoothly, but inside Sarah felt a strange tension, as if beneath the surface of ordinary words there was another unspoken line. When they got home, it was about 10 o'clock in the evening. Tom had already arrived and was waiting for them, lounging on the sofa with a laptop on his lap. Hello, he looked up and smiled when he saw them enter. How did it go? Sarah tried to speak cheerfully and casually. Very good. The exhibition was wonderful. The people were interesting. It's a pity you weren't there. Everyone sent you their regards. She sat down next to her husband, kissing him on the cheek. David settled into the chair opposite. Yeah, it was great, he confirmed. Sarah is the star of the evening. She got so many compliments about her taste in design. Sarah waved her hand dismissively. He's exaggerating. Tom smiled. Well, of course, she's a pro. I'm glad you had a great time. I felt guilty. It's okay, Sarah said softly. It's okay. Tom noticed the jacket in her arms. Are you cold? A little. It was chilly on the terrace, she replied, handing David the jacket. Thanks for lending it. David stood up and picked up his jacket, his fingers briefly brushing against Sarah's hand. She flinched, barely perceptibly, but she felt it. Their eyes met for a second. Sarah immediately looked at her husband, who was already staring at his laptop screen again, not noticing anything. Well, said David, throwing his jacket over his arm, I think I'll go to bed. Thanks again for the invitation, Sarah. Tom, good night. Calm down, my friend, Tom answered absent-mindedly. Good night, David, Sarah added quietly. When he left, Tom put his laptop down. Is it just me, or are you a little nervous? Sarah responded too sharply. What? Nervous? No, what makes you think that? Tom raised his eyebrows in surprise. I don't know, my voice is kind of strained. Sarah forced herself to relax and shrugged. I'm probably just tired. It's been a long day. He hugged her. Poor thing. Well then, go to sleep, march. I can barely hold on either. They lay down, and Tom fell asleep almost immediately. But Sarah couldn't close her eyes for long again. She sighed softly, going over every moment of the evening in her head. She felt a little ashamed. What had happened? Nothing. However, she caught herself thinking about David more often than she should have. Even now, his image appeared before her inner eye, how he looked at her, how he covered her with his jacket. Sarah angrily closed her eyes, hoping to drive away these images. That same night, in the guest room, David lay with his hands behind his head, thinking about what had happened too. The plan he had come for was gradually coming to fruition. Everything was going even better than he had expected. Sarah trusted him, cared for him, and now a spark of mutual attraction had run between them. He could feel it. It was hard to resist on the terrace. He had almost allowed himself more. But no, it was not time yet. David's gaze slid toward the nightstand where his leather duffel bag lay. A corner of an old photograph was sticking out of the side pocket. David carefully pulled it out and, sitting up, caught the moonlight. The picture showed three young and happy people, himself, Tom, and a girl with a mischievous smile between them, towards whom they both leaned slightly, clearly competing to see who was closer. This picture was taken in their second year. The girl's name was Emily. Back then, she was still his, before Tom ruined everything. David's eyes flashed with anger at the memory. He had kept the photograph as a reminder of a friendship that had turned to betrayal. His fingers tightened. Tom must have long since forgotten those days. Well, he would remember them, and feel what David had once felt. After another week, life for the three of them seemed settled. Tom was pleased to see David gradually coming to life. His friend began going to interviews and met up with old acquaintances around town a couple of times. Sarah, on the other hand, tried not to stay alone with David longer than necessary. After that evening in the gallery, she still felt a little awkward. It seemed to her that David, too, was holding himself a little distant, apparently understanding her state and not wanting to embarrass her. They communicated in a friendly manner, but tried not to go beyond the bounds of ordinary friendship. Tom, busy with his own affairs, noticed nothing. Only once, returning home early, he found Sarah thoughtfully looking out the window. When he asked if everything was okay, she quickly smiled and said that everything was fine. She was just thinking about the project. Tom believed her after all. His wife really did have several difficult orders. In mid-October, Tom had to go to Washington for 2 days for an important meeting with clients. It was his first extended absence since David had moved in. The night before he left, over dinner, Tom repeated several times how sorry he was to leave Sarah alone and with a guest in her care. "Oh, come on," Sarah laughed. "David and I won't get lost, right?" David, taking a bite of baked salmon, nodded. "Of course. Don't worry about anything, my friend. I promise to look after your beautiful wife." Tom smiled. I know. I just got used to you always being around." "Well, 2 days is not an eternity. I'll bring you something tasty from the capital." On Friday morning, Sarah kissed her husband goodbye at the door. Tom picked up his duffel bag and, with a wave, disappeared through the door. Sarah felt the usual little twinge of sadness. She always felt a little sad when he was gone, even for a short time. But 2 days was nothing, she told herself. During the day, she was busy with things. She went to the client, picked out fabric samples for the new living room. She returned closer to the evening, when it was already getting dark. David was at home. He also spent the day on the run, and when he returned, he looked tired. "How was your day?" Sarah asked, placing the sample bags on the chair. "Positive," David responded. "It seems there's a job lead. An agency is interested in my resume." "That's wonderful." Sarah was genuinely happy. "So there's a chance you'll be staying in New York for a long time soon?" David chuckled. "Maybe. We'll see. And you?" "I am also pleased we found a great wallpaper option for the client's living room. I am tired of running around the salons, but the result is worth it." She kicked off her high heels and stretched blissfully, loosening her stiff back. "Oh, my legs are buzzing. I guess I'm getting old." "You've got another 100 years to go before you're old," David joked from the next room. "Want some tea? I was just about to make some." "That would be great." A few minutes later, they were sitting on the living room sofa, sipping herbal tea with mint. The evening news was playing softly on the TV, but neither Sarah nor David were paying attention. The wind was howling outside the windows. An autumn cyclone had come to New York. The weather had deteriorated. The trees outside the window were swaying. Gusts of wind were hitting the glass. "It looks like there's going to be a storm tonight," David noted, looking up at the dark sky. "It seems so," Sarah agreed. "I really don't like strong winds. I'm always worried about the windows being blown out." David nodded understandingly. The tea was warming, and the room was becoming increasingly cozy. They were both visibly relaxed after a long day. "You know, Sarah, I wanted to ask." David began suddenly, twirling the cup in his hands. "I've been living with you for almost a month now. I hope I'm not causing too much inconvenience." Sarah looked at him in surprise. "What nonsense. Of course not. Tom and I were only too happy to help. It's just," David looked away, "I know it can't go on like this forever, and I really appreciate your kindness. I feel like I'm almost part of the family." "You are part of our family," Sarah said softly. "Tom thinks of you as a brother, and I've come to care about you over the years." She stopped short, realizing what she had said, and felt a wave of heat rush into her face. But the words were spoken, and they were true. She really did care about David, even if she avoided admitting it even to herself. David looked straight at her, and warm surprise flashed in his eyes. "You have no idea how important it is for me to hear this." There was a moment's pause. Somewhere outside the windows, the first rumble of thunder rumbled the storm was approaching. Sarah instinctively shuddered. David smiled softly. "Are you afraid of thunder?" "A little," she admitted. "Stupid, huh?" "Not at all. Everyone has their own fears." He stood up and went to the window, closing the shutters tighter. The rain was already pounding on the windowsill. "I think it's better to close all the windows just in case." Sarah stood up too. "I'll check the top floor." She and David walked around the house, closing the windows. A gale was blowing rain down the street. Back downstairs, Sarah found herself shivering, either from the chill or from worry. "Everything will be fine," David said calmly, coming closer. "The house is strong. It's just a thunderstorm." Sarah nodded, trying to control her nervous tremors. Another thunderclap, much louder than the previous one, struck. She instinctively grabbed David's elbow with her hand. Sorry, she began to step back embarrassedly, but he covered her hand with his. It's okay, he said quietly. I'm here. They stood in the middle of the living room in the semi-darkness. The lights were flickering because of a power failure, and they themselves had forgotten to turn on the large lamps. The dim light of the nightlight caught only the outlines of their figures. Sarah felt the warmth of David's palm on hers. Her heart began to beat against her chest again as it had on the terrace. David, she whispered, confused. SHH, he raised his other hand and gently brushed a strand of hair from her face. It's okay. He was so close. Serena's consciousness screamed that this was wrong, that she needed to move away, but her body seemed to have turned to stone. Another clap of thunder, a flash of lightning, and at that very moment she felt David's lips softly touch hers. The kiss was light, almost weightless, just a spark that ran between them in the darkness. Sarah did not pull away. For a moment, it was as if she ceased to exist in reality. No house, no storm, only this warm, soft kiss that made her head spin. However, a second later she seemed to wake up. She jerked back, pressing her hand to her mouth, her eyes wide with horror at what had happened. No, she breathed out. No, no, this is wrong. David looked at her, breathing quickly, confusion in his eyes, but not remorse, more like a burning desire, barely contained. Sarah, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. We were just nervous, she said quickly, backing away. The storm, you were trying to calm me down, that's all. Yes, he responded dully. Of course. Forgive me. Everything's fine, she answered haltingly. Nothing happened. Nothing. She turned and practically ran out of the living room, up the stairs, and slammed the bedroom door. Her heart was pounding so hard it felt like it was going to jump out. Oh my God, what am I doing? She screamed silently, feeling tears of shame and worry well up in her eyes. David remained standing below. He closed his eyes and ran his hand through his hair. It had happened. The ice had broken, the line had been crossed. A storm raged inside him, no less than the elements outside the window. Desire, triumph, and at the same time a strange bitterness all mixed up. He understood. Now there was no turning back. Deep down, David had not expected that it would be so difficult. He should be happy. The first step towards revenge has been taken. But remembering Sarah's confused eyes, he suddenly felt a pang of conscience. David furiously threw this feeling away. This was not the time for doubts. The goal was close, and the price. The price was only someone else's broken heart, just like his own had once been broken. On Saturday morning, Sarah emerged from her bedroom with a heavy heart. She had barely slept and now felt exhausted. She slipped on a robe and crept downstairs. The living room was empty, but there was a neatly laid tray on the kitchen table. Freshly brewed coffee in her favorite mug, warm toast with jam, and a note. With trembling fingers, Sarah picked up the scrap of paper and quickly ran her eyes over the line. Sarah, I went to the bakery this morning. Have some breakfast. I need some fresh air. I'll be back for lunch. D. She breathed a sigh of relief. David had wisely decided to give her some time alone. It was for the best. She still couldn't look him in the eye. She sat down at the table and mechanically took a bite of toast. She had no appetite. The image of their kiss at night kept appearing before her eyes. Guided by a feeling of guilt, Sarah took out her phone and wrote a message to her husband. Good morning, darling. How are you? I'm fine, I miss you. I'm waiting for you to come back. A few minutes later, Tom's reply came. He had already finished all his meetings and would be leaving home early and would be in New York this evening. Sarah found herself with mixed feelings. On the one hand, joy that Tom would soon be with her. On the other, anxiety. Would she be able to act as if nothing had happened? She spent the rest of the day busying herself, trying to distract herself. Twice she tried to call a friend or her mother just to talk. But what would she talk about? About her own betrayal? No, that was unacceptable. She had to deal with it herself. David returned towards midday. Sarah met him at the kitchen threshold with a tense look. He stopped, holding a bag of groceries. For a while, they were silent. "I bought vegetables, milk, and your favorite green tea," David said quietly. "I decided to make a stew for dinner." "Thank you," she answered just as quietly. He put the bag down and stood awkwardly, not knowing where to put his hands. Sarah took a breath. "We need to talk." "Yes," he responded immediately. "Please." She gestured toward the living room. They walked there and sat down, she on the sofa, he in the chair opposite. Sarah steepled her fingers, trying to keep her tone firm. "What happened yesterday? It's wrong. We both know it. It shouldn't have happened, and it will never happen again." David nodded, lowering his head. "I understand, and I'm very sorry. I lost my head. Forgive me." Sarah looked at him carefully. David looked genuinely remorseful. His shoulders were slumped, his eyes full of sadness. "It's my fault too," she sighed. "I shouldn't have allowed it." "It's not your fault," he said hotly, looking up. "I took advantage of your vulnerable moment. I feel terrible." Sarah was silent. She was slightly softened by his taking the blame. David shook his head. "Of course. I never. I could die, but I wouldn't tell him. Tom is my friend." Something in Sarah's chest sank at the words. A friend. Yes, a friend they had both betrayed. The darkness of guilt washed over her again, and tears welled up in her eyes. "Hey!" David stood up abruptly and sat down next to her, gently touching her shoulder. "Please don't cry." Sarah covered her face with her palms. "How could I? Tom would never forgive me." "SHH," David put his arm around her, trying to calm her down. "Nothing happened. It was a mistake, a moment of weakness. We'll get through this." Sarah took a few deep breaths, trying to stop the tears. She knew David was right, she just needed to forget. She wiped her eyes and pulled away. "Sorry. I won't cry anymore. That's it, I'm okay." David returned to his chair, giving her space. He looked at her with concern for a moment, then asked quietly, "Can we just pretend that nothing happened? I don't want to break your trust." Sarah smiled sadly. "The alternative is even worse, right? For all our sakes, it's better to pretend everything is as before." David nodded. Then he tried to smile shyly. "Friends?" She smiled sadly in response. "Friends." Sarah felt a sense of relief inside. It seemed the crisis was over. They both understood the boundaries and were willing to respect them. She wanted to believe that it would be so. Tom returned in the evening. Sarah literally ran out to meet him, barely hearing the sound of the door opening. She hung on his neck, clinging tightly. "Wow," Tom laughed, hugging her with one arm, holding the suitcase in the other. "What a warm welcome." "I missed you," she whispered, kissing him on the lips. "Me too." "Hello, dear." David walked out into the hallway, smiling. "Hello, traveler. How is the trip?" "Not bad." Tom put the suitcase down by the wall. "I'm tired, of course, but everything went well." Sarah noticed how David patted her husband on the shoulder with genuine warmth, and the tension inside her eased a little. Her friend was behaving absolutely normally as before. "Let's go have dinner," she suggested. "I made a stew according to your favorite recipe." "Wonderful, I'm dying of hunger." Tom perked up. At the table, Tom talked about his meetings, shared his impressions of Washington. Sarah listened, spellbound. Her husband looked so familiar and dear. She tried to catch every detail, laughed at his jokes, and sometimes gently touched his hand. Tom was glad of her attention after leaving. He also missed her. David kept up the conversation, inserting appropriate comments. Everything was almost perfect, except for the too smooth beating of Sarah's heart every time she forced herself not to look at David for more than a second. After dinner, Tom opened his palm to Sarah. "Here's a souvenir. Remember, you asked me to bring you something from the Smithsonian Museum." In his hand was a miniature marble figurine of the Capitoline cat. Sarah gasped and happily accepted the gift. "Oh, thank you. He's lovely." That evening, the couple retired early. Tom wanted to rest from the journey. Sarah, clutching the gifted figurine to her chest, felt almost like a criminal who had returned to the protection of the one she had betrayed. Tom's tenderness and care only increased her inner torment. When he quickly fell asleep in his arms, Sarah lay awake for a long time, looking at the ceiling and trying not to cry. She thought, maybe everything will really work out. She just needs to keep her distance and focus on her husband. Sooner or later, the forbidden feelings will fade away. They must fade away. Meanwhile, David was not sleeping either. He was sitting in his room, mechanically turning the pages of his book and not seeing anything in it. Today had not gone as he had planned. Sarah was clearly shaken by what had happened, and she wanted to take it all back. In her eyes, when she looked at Tom, David again saw that sincere love that had been there from the very beginning, and it irritated him. He closed the book and threw it hard on the table. He would have to hurry. Just waiting for Sarah's feelings for him to take over was not enough. He had to shake her confidence in Tom. No, not like that. In their marriage, find a crack. David remembered how Tom had always been the favorite in college, lucky, popular, getting away with everything. Even betraying Emily, David clenched his fists. Tom didn't deserve his happiness. His perfect life was about to fail, and David was ready to be the catalyst. Another couple of weeks passed. Family life went on as usual, seemingly back to normal. Tom was immersed in work. There was an important project coming up, and he often stayed late. Sarah tried to fill her time with meetings with clients, yoga in the mornings, and household chores. David kept his word. He behaved extremely correctly and friendly, helped with the housework, and was looking for a job. It seemed that the incident of that stormy night had been safely forgotten. But there was a subtle change in the air. Sarah felt it, even though she didn't want to admit it. Whenever she was alone with David, she had to force herself not to think about his lips on hers. She caught herself holding their gazes longer than necessary, or her heart beating faster when she heard his footsteps behind her. Then she would catch herself, remembering her promise to herself and to him that nothing more would happen. For David, these weeks were a test of patience. Sarah was in no hurry to get close again. Her guilt had strengthened her position. But David was willing to wait while taking careful steps. He subtly noticed all the little things in the spouse's relationship, looking for weak spots. One afternoon, while helping Sarah hang up the curtains after washing, he casually asked, "Have you and Tom thought about children?" Sarah, standing on the stepladder, flinched at the unexpected question. "Children? Well, of course we thought about it. We just never found the time and career. Tom says we can wait another year or two." "I see," David said, holding the edge of the curtain. "Sorry if I'm getting personal." "Nothing," she answered quietly. "And you, did you want children in your marriage?" David chuckled. "I wanted to. I love children in general. But Catherine put it off. Her business came first." In the end, he didn't finish, but Sarah understood. She spent the rest of the day in a slightly thoughtful mood. The thought of children made her wonder, why did she and Tom keep putting it off? She was already 33, it was time. But Tom always said, "We'll have time." She convinced herself that this was true, but suddenly a shadow of doubt stirred. Was he not in a hurry because he was not sure? What if deep down Tom did not want change? As if hearing her doubts, fate threw up a new challenge. One evening, Tom stayed late at a corporate presentation to celebrate the conclusion of a major deal. He warned that he would not return before midnight. Sarah understood. Such is the work, nothing can be done. She tried not to be jealous of his business. David suggested watching a movie together in the evening to while away the time. Sarah agreed it was easier to distract herself from disturbing thoughts in company. They chose a light comedy, and for a couple of hours Sarah really forgot herself, laughing at the jokes. David kept his distance, not allowing himself anything unnecessary. Around 11 o'clock the movie ended. Sarah looked at her watch. "It's late." "Thank you, the evening went well." "You're welcome," David smiled. "I'm glad it makes you feel a little more cheerful." Sarah noticed that he was enjoying spending time with her too. There was warm concern in his eyes. She quickly looked away and began collecting empty cups from the table. "Leave it, I'll clean it up myself," David said, taking the dishes from her. "Go and rest." "No way," she shook her head. "We'll get it done quickly together." The two of them carried the mugs and plates into the kitchen. Sarah turned on the tap and began rinsing. David was drying the clean dishes with a towel. At that moment, a signal sounded in the hallway. A message had arrived on his phone. Sarah glanced at the coffee table in the living room, where Tom usually left his mobile when he came home. The screen lit up. Tom must have decided to text that he was coming soon, she thought, wiping her hands. "Look what's there," she threw at David, referring to the message. "Certainly." David walked out into the hallway where the phone was lying and froze a second later. The screen displayed Anna Office. Under the name was a fragment of a message. "Thank you for a wonderful evening. When can we do it again?" David was momentarily stunned by his good fortune, as if fortune itself was on his side. He had only intended to pull off this trick, and now it had happened. Last week, he had noticed Tom's coworker, Anna, making advances toward him when Tom had mentioned that she was organizing the presentation. Anna seemed to be flirting. David quickly recovered from his confusion and called out quietly. Sarah? What's there?" she called from the kitchen. David walked back in, holding the phone in his hand and frowning slightly. "It looks like it's from Tom's colleague, Anna." Sarah blinked in confusion. "And what does she write at midnight?" David handed her the phone. Sarah skimmed the message and turned pale. "Beautiful evening." Say it again. Her heart sank painfully. "Probably she's about the presentation, about the corporate event," Sarah said uncertainly, feeling nausea rising in her throat. "Maybe so," David said slowly, although the smiley. He didn't finish, but it was clear anyway. There was no business sense in putting a winking smiley. Sarah silently put the phone down on the table. Her head was buzzing. She tried to think rationally. Anna was a young colleague. Perhaps she allowed herself to be frivolous in her correspondence. Tom might not react to this at all. But then why did she write, "Let's repeat"? Repeat what? "Sarah," David said quietly, "I'm sure Tom will explain everything. Don't rush to conclusions, okay?" There was such understanding gentleness in his voice that Sarah suddenly burst into tears. "I feel like a fool," she whispered through tears. "I reassure myself that everything is fine with us, but he. You're not stupid, and nothing is clear yet. Please don't cry." David hugged her gently, the way you would hug a sister or a close friend in trouble. Sarah didn't pull away. She needed support now, and he was the only one there. She could hear his heartbeat in her ear. "I felt something was wrong a week ago," David said quietly. "Remember when Tom came home late and didn't even call? Then he said the battery was dead. But when did that happen? He always warned before." Sarah became wary. "You think?" David sighed. "I don't want to think about anything. I just noticed that he looked strange then. He smiled guiltily somehow. I didn't attach any importance to it. And now this." These words planted the final seed of suspicion in her soul. Yes, that evening Tom came home absent-minded. Sarah remembered. She had asked him how everything had gone, and he had gotten off with a short, "Everything was fine, just tired." Why hadn't she guessed? They were silent for a few minutes, pressed close to each other. David knew that he couldn't slander Tom too much. Sarah might still rise up and defend her husband. No, it was better to be on her side, but not to attack Tom openly. He stroked Sarah's back. "Maybe it's a misunderstanding. Let's wait for him and ask him calmly. Okay?" Sarah nodded, wiping away her tears. "Yes, of course. I'm just asking." Half an hour later, footsteps were heard on the porch and the sound of the lock being opened. Sarah and David exchanged glances. He gently squeezed her hand as if to say, "I'm here." Tom entered the hallway, flushed from the cool wind, a little tired but happy. "Hello," he said cheerfully, shaking the raindrops off his coat. "Aren't you asleep yet? How was the movie?" Sarah stood in the middle of the room, clutching the phone to her chest. David stayed close, a little behind. The movie, she began hoarsely, was okay. Tom, you have a message. Tom dropped his coat on the hanger. Message? From whom? Sarah handed him the phone, trying not to burst into tears again. Tom looked at the screen in confusion. His eyebrows went up. What the... He looked up at his wife. Sarah, I don't know why she sent this. She must have been drunk at the party. There's a co-worker there. Anna, yes? She asked sharply. Tom sighed. Yes, Anna. She flirts with everyone, honestly. Nothing happened. We were just sitting in a group, discussing a deal. Then why does she say, let's do it again? Sarah struggled to keep her voice from shaking. I have no idea. Maybe she thought we had a great time, so she wants to do it again. Sarah, you know I never. He stepped towards her, trying to hug her, but she pulled away. Do I know? Do I know, Tom? You're always at work. I have no idea what's going on there. Maybe you're having an affair, all these delays, trips. What? Tom looked stunned. How can you think that? Sarah felt anger mixing with pain. She almost screamed, forgetting about David's presence. And what should I think if here are the facts? A message from a woman at night with hints. If nothing happened, why is she writing this? How should I know? Tom threw up his hands. Do you want me to call her in front of you and ask her what she means? He rummaged in his pocket and pulled out a business card. Here, this is her number. Come on. Sarah was confused and silent. She hadn't expected such a reaction. Tom dialed the number with a shaking hand. A few seconds later, there was an answer. Even through the receiver, Sarah heard a drunken female voice. Tom turned on the speakerphone. Anna? Hi, it's Tom. I see your message here. What are you talking about? There was a laugh at the other end. Tom, oh, I didn't think you'd read it today. It's about nothing. I'm a fool. I'm just joking. The party was great. We need to repeat it more often. That's all. Don't be offended that I disturbed you. I see. Okay, see you later. He hung up and looked at Sarah with eyes full of pain and resentment. Do you believe me now? Sarah stood with her eyes downcast. She was ashamed of her outburst, but her anxiety was still there. She answered barely audibly. Sorry, I guess I was just overexcited. Tom shook his head. Simple. Excellent. Thank you for your trust. He turned and walked out of the living room, striding upstairs. A minute later, the bedroom door slammed upstairs. Sarah sank down on the sofa, clutching her temples with her palms. She wanted to rush after her husband, to ask for forgiveness, but some pride and resentment held her back. After all, in fact, her suspicions were not without foundation. The woman really was flirting with Tom. And who knows, maybe it would have gone further if she had not turned him away. This thought burned her heart. Please don't blame yourself. David's quiet voice came from next to me. Tom's reaction. Well, he was emotional too. You were both overexcited. Sarah winced, for a moment completely forgetting that David was still there, an unwitting witness to the scene. She suddenly felt embarrassed that she had revealed the family quarrel to him. I'm sorry. You weren't supposed to see that. It's okay. He sat down next to her. I'm sorry it happened. Sarah smiled bitterly through her tears. You hardly feel sorry. You warned me. What are you talking about? Then, do you remember, on the first day you arrived, you said, he found his happiness. Not everyone can do that. You probably saw the cracks from the very beginning that we ourselves did not notice. David looked at her carefully, gently reached out and wiped a tear from her cheek. You don't deserve tears, Sarah. You're an amazing woman, and if someone doesn't appreciate that. He didn't finish, but his eyes spoke for him. Sarah shook her head, feeling her breath catch again at the touch of his fingers. No need. What no need? He whispered. Am I wrong? Don't you deserve true, complete love without doubts and secrets? Sarah was speechless. Tears began to flow down her face again, now tears of long, lasting internal pain that had been building up somewhere deep. David hugged her, and this time she did not resist. She cried on his chest, pouring out all the accumulated resentment, the fear of losing her husband, the fear of being deceived, and some other feeling that had been brewing for a long time. After a few minutes, the sobbing died down. Sarah raised her head. David's face was very close. He wiped her wet cheeks, looked into her eyes. "Everything is fine," he whispered. "Nothing is good," she blurted out. "Everything is falling apart." "It's not falling apart," he said quietly. "It's just changing. You're not alone, Sarah. I'm here." And he kissed her. This time she did not pull away. The kiss was greedy, deep. It mixed mutual pain, understanding, and passion that both had been suppressing for so long. It seemed to Sarah as if a dam had burst all prohibitions, all logic had collapsed. She responded to him, forgetting about everything, about her husband above, about her principles. When David, breathing heavily, whispered through kisses, "Are you sure?" she only pressed herself closer to him in response. There was no mind left. There was only a body, thirsting for comfort and tenderness. They went upstairs, trying to be quiet. On the second floor, only a nightlight was on in the hallway. Tom and Sarah's bedroom was behind a closed door. No sound came from there. Perhaps Tom was already asleep or lying with headphones on, as he sometimes did after arguments. David gently pulled Sarah into the guest room. The door closed. In the darkness, they were again engulfed in a kiss. Sarah felt how he gently but insistently inclined her to the bed. Sarah unbuttoned the buttons of his shirt with trembling fingers, feeling how excitement caught her breath. David covered her face and neck with greedy kisses, their bodies themselves seeking each other in the passionate darkness. That night, the boundaries were completely erased. Sarah gave in to an impulse that she would later regret more than once, but now she thought of nothing except how good and warm she felt in David's arms. Waking up early in the morning, Sarah didn't realize for a moment where she was. The room around her was strange, and only a few seconds later, seeing dark strands of David's hair on the pillow next to her, she remembered everything. Her heart sank painfully. Carefully, so as not to wake the sleeping man, Sarah got out of bed. Her head was buzzing. Both lack of sleep and the shocks of the night were taking their toll. Her gaze fell on the half-open door to the hallway. There, on the floor, lay her house slipper. Sarah stealthily picked it up and quietly left. The house was quiet. The clock showed 6:30 in the morning, and dawn was just breaking outside the windows. She slipped into her bedroom. The bed was untouched. Tom had never slept there. Sarah's heart sank. He must have spent the night on the sofa or in the study. Another guilt on her shoulders. She quickly changed into clean clothes and went downstairs. Tom was sitting in the kitchen, already dressed, with a cup of coffee. There were shadows under his eyes. It looked like he hadn't slept much either. Hearing his wife's footsteps, he looked up. They stared at each other for a few seconds. "Hello," Tom was the first to break the silence, his voice hoarse from fatigue. "Hello," Sarah answered just as quietly. "Have you been awake for a long time?" "About 4 o'clock, he tried to smile. "I didn't get much of a nap." Sarah looked down. She wanted to throw herself on his neck, to apologize for everything, for last night, but the words stuck. Tom stood up, poured fresh coffee into a mug, and placed it in front of her. "Here you go. You probably need a pick-me-up." "Thank you." She sat down, cupping her hands around her. Tom hesitated, standing next to her. Finally, he said quietly, "Sarah, I don't want this resentment to remain between us. Forgive me for yelling. Your suspicions hurt me, but perhaps I am also to blame. I spend too much time outside the home." Sarah winced with shame. How unfair her accusations had been, and how generously he was now apologizing. "No, it's my fault," she whispered. "I wound myself up. I'm sorry I didn't trust you." Tom placed his hand on top of hers. "So, peace." Sarah nodded, unable to look up at him without him seeing the storm of emotions inside her. Tom sighed with relief. "Thank you. I must admit, I thought all night. I was afraid that a rift was growing between us." He sat down on a chair next to her. "Sarah, you know how much I love you. You are the most precious thing I have. And if you are unhappy—" He fell silent without finishing his sentence. Sarah shook her head. I'm not unhappy. It's just, a lot of things have piled up. I'm sorry. Tom smiled faintly. Okay then. Maybe we should have some fun together. It's Saturday. Let's go somewhere. Have lunch in town or go to the park. Sarah hesitated. She couldn't bear the thought of spending the day with her husband, pretending that everything was as before when she herself was in such disarray. But she couldn't hurt Tom by refusing. Let's try, she said, trying to fake a smile. Tom touched her shoulder. If you want, we can invite David too, so that he doesn't feel out of place. Sarah was overcome with panic. No, she blurted out too sharply. That is, I doubt he'll be interested. It's better if it's just the two of us. Tom looked at her in surprise, but remained silent, only nodding. Soon David came down too. He had changed his nightshirt for a shirt and looked slightly wary. His gaze first found Sarah. She quickly turned away to the sink, feeling her cheeks burning. Tom, on the contrary, greeted them amiably. Good morning. How did you sleep? Not bad, David replied, clearing his throat. You're up early. Tom shrugged. Something woke me up. Sar, I'll quickly run for some croissants, okay? I don't have the energy to cook breakfast. Of course, she nodded, glad that he was leaving, even for a few minutes. I'll be right there. Tom took his jacket and keys. When the door closed behind him, there was silence. Sarah felt David's gaze on her and didn't know what to do with herself. Finally, he asked quietly, How are you? She turned around. There was anxiety and tenderness in his eyes. This look instantly melted all her defenses. She exhaled. I don't know. I don't know anything, David. He stepped closer. Do you regret what happened? Sarah closed her eyes, holding back tears. I don't know. I'm ashamed. In front of Tom and in front of myself. But at the same time, she took a shuddering breath. I can't pretend I don't feel anything. David touched her shoulder with his hand. Me too. Yesterday, it wasn't just emotional. I really do have feelings for you, Sarah, and they won't disappear with a snap of a finger. Sarah looked at him, shocked by the revelation. David continued, lowering his voice to a whisper. I understand how hard it is for you. You are torn. But know this, I don't regret anything. Whatever happens next, you made me feel alive, and I want you to be happy, even if it's not with me. The last phrase was obviously an effort for him. Sarah couldn't take it anymore. Sobbing, she pressed her forehead to his chest. God, David, what are we going to do? How are we going to live with this? He hugged her, stroking her back. Quiet, quiet. No decisions are needed now. Let's just be careful. No one should know anything. And then, time will tell. Sarah understood the wisdom of these words. She nodded and wiped away her tears. David kissed her forehead tenderly. Everything will be fine. I'm with you. They quickly pulled away when they heard the door opening. Tom returned with still warm croissants and buns. The smell of baking filled the kitchen. Sarah tried to pull herself together. She noticed how David instantly turned into his usual friend. He took the paper bag from Tom and began to put the buns on a plate. The three of them had a fairly quiet breakfast. Tom was telling Sarah about his plans to show her the new sculpture park in Manhattan, and she nodded and played along with his enthusiasm. David noticed how she tried to avoid meeting his eyes. He knew that Sarah would now cling to her marriage, trying to convince herself that everything could be put back on track. But he was sure that this was self-deception. Soon the couple left, leaving David alone. He went into the living room, where the faint scent of Sarah's perfume still lingered. He sank into the chair, clutching the armrests. It had been a difficult morning for him, seeing how he and Tom were trying to get along, smiling in his presence as if nothing had happened. Jealousy, sharp, burning, flared up in his chest. He endured it for the sake of the ultimate goal. No matter, he thought, they won't have much time left to pretend. That day, Tom and Sarah spent a few hours in the city. They walked around the sculpture park, went into a small cafe. Tom did everything to ease the tension. He joked, told funny stories. Sarah tried to smile, but deep down she was tormented. Returning home in the evening, they barely spoke. Fatigue and tension took their toll. By evening, Sarah felt emotionally drained. Tom, noticing this, suggested watching a movie together, but she cited a headache and locked herself in her room. Tom respectfully did not disturb her. Instead of resting, Sarah went into the bathroom and stood under the shower for a long time, trying to wash away the burden of her experiences. She had barely come out and wrapped herself in a robe when a quiet knock on the door made her start. "It's me," David's voice whispered. Sarah hurried to open the door. David stood in the semi-darkness of the corridor. "I heard that you had a headache. I brought pills and water," he whispered, showing a glass and a couple of pills in his palm. Sarah's heart sank with tenderness and longing at once. She took the pills. "Thank you. You are so caring." "I couldn't leave you to suffer," he smiled sadly. "How are you?" "Like on a swing," she answered honestly, "back and forth." David nodded in understanding. "If anything, I'm nearby. Good night, Sarah." "Good night," she whispered. He went to his room. Sarah closed the door, leaned against it, and closed her eyes. She wanted to cry again. Instead, she went to bed. Thus began the days of a dual existence for Sarah. During the day, she tried to be a loving wife to Tom. She cooked dinners, asked about work, even initiated a couple of trips to a restaurant, hoping to convince herself that everything was as before. But at night, as soon as Tom fell asleep, she listened to the rustling in the house, catching the sounds. Would David leave the room? Sometimes she herself quietly made her way to him, like a shadow. In the darkness, they found each other, greedily satisfying their mutual passion with whispers and kisses, and in the morning Sarah returned to her bed. Each time she swore to herself that this was the last, but her body and heart betrayed her again and again. David did not rush her or push her away. He was always kind, gentle, assuring her that he loved her and would accept any choice she made as long as she was happy. These words penetrated Sarah's very heart. It seemed to her that she had met a kindred spirit, a person who understood her to the depths. And with Tom, there was now a wall of lies and omissions between them. Every day this wall grew, separating them more and more. For Tom, the days that followed were a time of increasing anxiety. He couldn't understand why, but he felt that something important was slipping through his fingers. Everything seemed to be going well. Sarah had stopped mentioning that night's message and was being kind to him again. David was as friendly as ever. But in the rare moments of silence, when Tom looked around, he was haunted by a vague sense of something wrong. One night, Tom woke up thirsty around 3 in the morning. Reaching for the water jug on the nightstand, he found the bed next to him empty. Sarah was gone. Tom became wary. Sitting up, he looked around the darkened bedroom. The door was ajar. He stood up and walked out into the hallway. There was silence in the house. There was no light anywhere on the second floor. Tom called out quietly, "Sarah?" There was no answer. He went downstairs. Perhaps she was feeling unwell or couldn't sleep and decided to have some tea. The night light was on in the kitchen, but she was not there. But Tom noticed that the back door of the terrace leading to the yard was unlocked. He looked out. There was no one on the porch, only moonlight flooded the garden behind the house. A strange uneasiness crept into his soul. He returned upstairs. Suddenly, he heard a light creak. The door of the guest room opened slightly, and from there, like a silent shadow, slipped out Sarah. Tom froze. His wife, barefoot, trying not to make any noise, crept down the hall and darted into their bedroom, not even noticing her husband in the darkness. Tom's heart began to pound. He went to the half-open door of the guest room. It was dark inside, but for a moment Tom made out a vague silhouette on the bed. Someone was lying there. He pulled back, stunned. A wave of either anger or horror rose in his chest. "It can't be. No, she just." Maybe she felt sick and David helped. He tried to find an explanation, although his mind was screaming about something else. Tom came back into the bedroom. Sarah was already lying down, the blanket pulled up to her chin. He could hear her breathing raggedly, as if she had just been running. Tom slowly came over and lay down too. His heart was beating so loudly that he thought she should hear it. "Sarah," he called quietly. She jerked in surprise. "You, why aren't you sleeping?" Tom swallowed the lump in his throat. "And you?" Even in the darkness, he saw her blush, got up to drink some water. "My head hurt a little." "I understand," was all he answered. He didn't sleep a wink the rest of the night. Neither did Sarah, apparently. Tom lay staring at the ceiling, feeling that the crack he had talked about in the kitchen that morning actually ran deep and unbridgeable between them. In the morning, barely waiting for Sarah to go to the shower, Tom firmly headed to the guest room. David was no longer there. It seemed he had gotten up early and gone for a run. Tom looked around at the neat bed, the nightstand. His gaze was caught by a photograph half peeking out of the half-open pocket of David's travel bag standing by the wall. Tom frowned and, overcoming his hesitation, carefully pulled out the photo. On the faded glossy paper, he saw 3 young students himself, David, and a girl named Emily, with whom they had both once been friends. Tom's heart sank. This photo was from a long time ago, when everything was carefree, before Tom made the biggest mistake of his life. He sat down on the edge of the bed, looking at Emily's smiling face. Memories came rushing back. Emily was David's girlfriend at the time. Tom secretly envied his friend. Emily was bright, kind, he liked her. When Tom and Emily had a fleeting affair, he later repented and begged his friend for forgiveness. David withdrew into himself and stopped communicating with him. They only made up towards their senior year, and they never spoke about it again. Tom thought that everything was in the past. He married Sarah. David married someone else a couple of years later. It seemed that life had moved on. But why now, many years later, does David carry this reminder with him? Tom seemed to have an epiphany. All the strange things of the last few days, Sarah's tension, her disappearances at night, David's guilty look, his excessive courtesy, a chill ran down his spine. Was it really possible? Could David really have planned something so cruel to seduce his best friend's wife in order to take revenge for an old insult? Thoughts raced through his head. Tom tucked the photo back in and ran out of the room, making it back to his bedroom before Sarah came out of the shower. He couldn't look her in the eye over his morning coffee. Sarah was talking about her plans for the day, trying to look casual, but there was worry lurking in the corners of her eyes. "Is she afraid I've figured it out?" Tom thought bitterly. Tom was not himself in the office during the day. He decided to leave early, lying to his boss that he was unwell. He had only one thought in his head, to verify his suspicions to the end. When he returned home around 4 in the afternoon, no one was home. Sarah had left for a meeting with a client, and David was also absent. Tom wandered through the empty rooms, not knowing what to do, how to be. A part of his soul still hoped that he was wrong, that everything could be explained differently. But then why was Sarah lying to him? Why did she leave David's room at night? Evening came. Sarah returned about 6, tired, and said she wanted to go to bed early. Tom answered briefly that he had a headache and would sleep too. David returned later, said hello quietly, and went up to his room. Tom lay in the darkness, listening. About 11 o'clock, he heard Sarah, thinking her husband was asleep, creep out of bed. Tom's heart began to beat wildly. He waited until his wife's footsteps had died away in the hallway, and then rose silently himself. The guest room door was closed. Tom came close and froze, fighting the approaching trembling. Quiet voices were heard from inside. "I can't. He suspects something. I feel it," Sarah said barely audibly. "He hardly looked at me today." "Everything will be fine," David answered just as quietly. It would never have occurred to him. "I'm scared, David. I can't do this anymore. This lie is killing. Darling. Everything will be resolved soon, I promise. The main thing is to hold on a little longer. I'm with you." There was a pause, then the sound of a kiss. Tom's eyes darkened. There was no longer any doubt. He opened the door, turning on the light. "What's going on here?" On the bed, 2 people were frozen in an embrace, his wife and his best friend. Sarah gasped and pulled away from David, who slowly got up, covering himself with the blanket. Tom felt his insides breaking. The picture before his eyes was unbearable: Sarah's disheveled hair, her face burning with shame, her bare shoulder. David, half-dressed, pale, but maintaining some kind of ominous calm. "Tom," he began hoarsely. "Shut up." Tom's voice broke. "How could you?" Sarah burst into tears. "Tom, I'm sorry. In my house." He was almost choking with rage. "My friend, my wife, what?" David dropped his feet to the floor. His shirt was lying on the chair. He threw it on, not taking his eyes off Tom. "Tom, listen." But Tom wouldn't listen. In one leap, he crossed the space between them and punched David in the face. He didn't have time to dodge. His head fell back with a dull thud, and he fell to the floor. "No," Sarah screamed, rushing between them. "Tom, stop." Tom stood over his fallen friend, breathing heavily. David wiped the corner of his mouth, and there was blood on his fingers, but instead of pain, something else flashed in his eyes: satisfaction. "Hit me, Tom," David said quietly, rising to his knees. "Why did you stop?" Tom was confused. Sarah was shaking, crying, trying to grab her husband's hands, but he pulled away. You slept with my wife, you bastard. I'll kill you." He lunged forward again, but now David was ready. He caught the blow and threw Tom onto the bed. Sarah screamed. The two men grappled in a furious struggle. "You were like a brother to me," Tom shouted, trying to squeeze David. "And you, how could you? How could you?" David suddenly shouted back, and his voice rang with long-suppressed rage. He leaned on Tom, looking him straight in the face. "Do you think I forgot? Do you think I forgave you?" Tom froze beneath him, shocked by his friend's face, distorted with hatred. "What are you talking about?" "About college, Tom," David said through clenched teeth. "About what you did to me back then. You stole my love, ruined my life once upon a time, and now I do it to you." Sarah stood there, pale as a sheet, her hand over her mouth in shock. Tom breathed heavily, feeling his strength drain away, giving way to the icy horror of understanding. "So," he barely managed to say, "that's why all this." David chuckled, letting go of his opponent and standing up to his full height. "Yes, buddy, you got it right." Tom stood up too, unsteadily, his chest heaving convulsively. You're because of Emily?" "David, it's been years." "For you, they passed," he barked. "But for me, no. I waited a long time for a chance, and now I got it. How does it feel now to know that the woman you love has betrayed you?" Tom stepped back as if he had been slapped, his face darkening with pain. "God." Sarah tried to understand the meaning of their words. "Emily? What? What Emily?" David turned to her with a grim smile. "Oh yeah, you don't know. Ask your husband how he once slept with his best friend's girlfriend and then pretended nothing happened." Sarah looked at Tom, stunned. He stood with his head down. The silence spoke for itself. Sarah was shaking. Her breathing was ragged, and the world was swimming before her eyes. Tom and David stood opposite each other, breathing heavily. The room seemed too small for the three of them. Tom was the first to break the silence. He lowered his hands and said quietly, looking at David, "Get out, right now." David sat up, wiping the blood from his cut lip with his sleeve. He glanced at Sarah, who was sitting on the edge of the bed, her arms wrapped around herself as if trying to keep from falling apart. There was a look of shock and disgust on her face, and David clearly knew it was over. He leaned over and picked up his jacket from the floor. Tom took a step closer. "You can take the rest later. Get out." David squinted slightly and looked at him with a wry smile. "As you say," he replied hoarsely. His eyes were filled with malicious doom. As he passed Tom, he couldn't help but say through his teeth, "Well, hero, rejoice. Now your wife knows the price of betrayal." Tom turned white with rage and was already raising his fist, but Sarah suddenly shouted loudly, "Stop it." Both men turned to face her. She rose unsteadily from the bed. Her face was wet with tears, but her eyes were blazing with anger. "My God, you're dividing me up like a thing. David, go away." Her voice broke. David froze, as if he had received another blow. He was silent for a few seconds, then nodded. He headed for the door. At the threshold, David glanced back, his gaze darted to Sarah, as if he wanted to say something to justify himself. But Sarah turned away, not wanting to see his face anymore. David's shoulders slumped. He stepped over the threshold and disappeared into the darkness of the night. Downstairs, the front door slammed. There was a ringing silence. Tom was still breathing heavily, slumped over the edge of the table. Sarah stood in the middle of the room, looking at the floor. So, her voice trembled, it was revenge. Just revenge. Tom ran his hand over his face. He was ashamed to look at his wife. The awareness of his own role in what had happened made him sick. It turns out, yes, he answered barely audibly. Sarah winced as if she had been slapped. She looked up at him with eyes full of pain and rage. And it's all because of you. Tom closed his eyes. I know. Because of what you did to Emily. Sarah's voice was thick with accusation. You started this chain. You betrayed a friend, and he came and ruined our lives. I know, Tom started to shout, but stopped himself. His shoulders slumped. I know, Sarah. I'm guilty. Me and him and us. He hesitated to say, and you, but she herself continued with a bitter smile. Yes, and I'm also to blame. They looked at each other, exhausted, almost without strength, as if the fight had ended in a draw, leaving no winners, but only broken participants. There was a heavy pause. Somewhere behind the wall, a clock ticked rhythmically. Tom tried to take a step towards Sarah. Sarah, don't come closer, she whispered, raising her hand. Please. He froze. Sarah covered her face with her hands. I need to think. Get out of here. Where are you? I don't know, she cried desperately, dropping her hands. Just go away. I can't be around you now. Tom felt everything inside him break, but he knew he had no right to demand that she stay. I'll take you. No need, she shook her head, retreating to the door. I'll do it myself. Sarah moved away, past the frozen Tom. He stood with his head down, afraid to look at her, and yet, when she drew level, he exhaled barely audibly. You will come back. She froze on the threshold, her gaze clouded with tears. I don't know. These 3 words sounded like a death sentence. Tom felt as if he had fallen into a bottomless pit. Sarah turned away abruptly and ran out of the room. A minute later, the front door slammed, for the umpteenth time during that terrible hour. Tom had no memory of the rest of the night. He wandered through the house as if on autopilot, returning again and again to the empty bedroom. Finally, he sank to the floor of the living room, where the 3 of them had been laughing over coffee that morning. He stared ahead, unseeing. His hand found a framed photograph lying on the floor, a wedding photo of him and Sarah, happy and radiant. Tom ran his trembling fingers over the dusty glass. An unbearable pain pierced his heart. He sobbed softly, then again. The tears poured out, and soon he was sobbing uncontrollably. Everything was crumbling: his marriage, his friendship, his past, and his future. He knew he had partly brought this storm on himself, but that didn't make it any easier. At the same hour, 10 blocks further, Sarah was also crying loudly in a taxi. She had given the driver the address of Lena, her best friend, with whom she had sought refuge. A black hole gaped in her chest. She covered her face with her hands, and before her mind's eye appeared faces, 2 once beloved faces, 2 traitors. There was Tom smiling at her at their wedding dance. She closed her eyes, trying to drive away the memory, but it only flared up stronger. There she and her husband 2 years ago, holding hands on a beach in California, promising each other to always be together. Lies, all lies, hit her consciousness. Sarah bit her lip, choking back sobs. In a matter of hours, she had lost both her husband and the man to whom she had become attached with her soul. One turned out to be an avenger, cold-bloodedly using her in his game. The other one now appeared as a liar, capable of betraying loved ones, whom she, it turns out, never knew to the end. How to live on? This thought pounded in her temples with every heartbeat, while tears clouded her eyes. Meanwhile, David was wandering along the deserted night sidewalk, not making out the road. He himself did not really know where he was going. Everything worked out, and at the same time, everything collapsed. He took revenge on his friend as he wanted. He saw in his friend's eyes the same pain that had once burned him. But why was there no joy? Instead of triumph, his soul was filled with emptiness and a bitter feeling of guilt. Before his mind's eye stood the image of Sarah, the way she looked at him when she asked him to leave. In her eyes, disappointment and disgust. David stopped and pressed his forehead to the cold lamppost. "What an idiot I am," he whispered into the night, squeezing his eyes shut. He did not notice how he himself had fallen in love with her uncontrollably, and now he had lost her, his friend, and himself. Remorse, belated and useless, tormented him. Unable to bear the silence, David walked further through the night city forward, away, just so as not to look back. The night dragged on endlessly. By morning, Sarah had not closed her eyes, lying on Lena's couch and staring at one point on the wall. Tom, sitting in the empty house, met the dawn completely alone, on the floor among scattered photographs, and could not stop his hands from shaking. David bought a ticket on the next flight back to California. He wanted to fly away as soon as possible, if only thousands of miles separated him from what he had done. The morning of a new day has arrived, but their old life is left behind. Autumn 10 years ago was noisy and bright. The Columbia University campus lived the usual student life. Lectures and seminars during the day, parties, sports, and endless conversations until the morning and the evening. Tom and David rented a small apartment not far from the campus in their second year, 2 rooms and a common living room. The living room was a creative mess, textbooks mixed with dumbbells under the table, posters of David's favorite rock band on the walls, and yesterday's pizza on the kitchen table. However, both were happy with such a dwelling. They had no time for meticulous cleaning. They were considered inseparable friends. They studied for exams together, played for the faculty football team on weekends together, and often hung out with friends together. That October weekend, David went to Boston for a couple of days to help his cousin move to his home. Tom was alone and initially welcomed the opportunity to focus on a school project in silence. But on Saturday night, the silence was broken by an unexpected knock on the door. Emily, a pretty red-haired philosophy major, stood in the doorway. She had been dating David for almost a year, and Tom knew her well. Emily looked upset. Her eyes were red, and she was holding a plastic bag. "Hello, Tom," she said hesitantly. "Sorry I didn't call. David's gone, I know. But he asked me to water your flower, the one by the window. I called you, but you didn't pick up." "Oh, right," Tom slapped his forehead. He left in a hurry and must have forgotten. "Come in, of course." He let Emily in. The girl came in, shivering from the cool autumn evening. Tom noticed traces of tears on her cheeks. "Everything okay?" he asked cautiously as Emily placed the bag against the wall, revealing a bottle of lemonade and a box of cookies. "We had a fight with David yesterday," she sighed, looking down. "He left, and we never made up. Now I feel terrible." Tom gestured for her to sit down on the sofa. "I'm sorry. Do you want some tea? I have some chamomile. It's calming." "Okay, thank you," Emily smiled sadly. While Tom was busy in the kitchen, putting the kettle on, Emily sat quietly, hugging her knees. He glanced at her through the half-open door. His heart sank with pity. Emily had always seemed to him the brightest and kindest girl in the world. Secretly, Tom had long been partial to her, but he would never allow himself to cross the line. After all, she was his best friend's girlfriend. However, seeing her unhappy was unbearable. He returned with 2 mugs of hot tea and sat down next to her. Emily accepted the mug gratefully, her fingers trembling. "Do you want to tell me what you fought about?" Tom asked softly. "It's stupid." She sighed, nervously moving her shoulder. "I got jealous of him with one of his classmates. Of course, he got angry. He said that I didn't trust him. We said too much to each other." Emily frowned, her lips trembling. "And today is this girl's birthday. Our whole company went out of town to celebrate. And David wanted to too. Naturally, I didn't go. He asked, "Why can't I let go of the situation?" She brushed away a tear. In the end, he lost his temper and went to relatives, leaving me with all these feelings. Tom shook his head. "I'm sorry it happened. He can be hot-tempered sometimes, but I'm sure he loves you." "I don't know." Emily looked out into the darkness outside the window. "Today, I suddenly thought, what if? What if he really found someone more interesting than me?" "Emily, no." Tom lightly covered her hand with his. "David is a fool sometimes, but he dotes on you, believe me." Emily smiled sadly through her tears. "You always know how to calm people down. Unlike him." She turned to Tom. A tense silence hung between them. Tom suddenly realized how close they were sitting, his knee touching hers, his warm hand under hers. He should have pulled back, set a boundary, but he didn't move. "You know, I guess I should go," Emily said quietly, but didn't move. "Maybe you should stay," Tom said almost in a whisper, not believing his own words. "I mean, just stay here. Not alone. I can sleep on the couch, and you can sleep in my room. You shouldn't be alone tonight." He fell silent, confused. Emily looked into his eyes. Contradictions swirled in her gaze: sadness, loneliness, and something else. Suddenly, she leaned hesitantly against his shoulder, lowering her head. "Thank you, Tom. You are so good." Tom swallowed hard, smelling her hair, a faint hint of vanilla. His arm instinctively went around her shoulders. "It's okay," he whispered. "You're not alone." Emily lifted her face, her eyes shining. She suddenly reached out and gently touched his lips with hers. Tom knew that something forbidden, something wrong was happening, but he couldn't pull away. The blood was roaring in his ears. He responded to the kiss, timidly at first, then more forcefully. Emily sighed and pressed herself against him. A minute later, they pulled away from each other, shocked. "I'm sorry," Emily immediately whispered, looking away. "I don't know what came over me." Tom ran his hand feverishly through his hair. "No, it's my fault. We shouldn't." "Yes," she quickly agreed. They fell silent, trying to catch their breath. But as soon as their eyes met again, the spark flared up with renewed vigor. The next second, Tom was kissing her with desperate passion, and Emily no longer resisted. A few moments later, they stumbled into Tom's room and fell onto the bed, forgetting about everything in the world. The next morning, Tom woke up from the creak of the front door. His heart sank painfully. David was back. In the rays of gray autumn light, he saw Emily lying next to him on a crumpled sheet. She also heard the sound and jumped up, looking around in panic. "Oh God," she whispered, realizing the situation. "David." "Get dressed quickly," Tom whispered, jumping off the bed and hastily pulling on his jeans. They scrambled to gather up their scattered clothes. Emily had barely managed to throw her jacket over her t-shirt when the door to the room burst open. David stood there, holding a duffel bag. He looked at them, at the disheveled, half-naked Tom, at the tearful Emily beside him, and his expression slowly changed from bewilderment to horror to undisguised rage. "What? What's going on here?" David's voice broke, his eyes flashing. "Emily? Tom?" "David, it's not what you think," Tom blurted out, feeling hot and cold at the same time. "Let me explain." "You?" David didn't hear. He threw the bag on the floor. "How could you, Tom? I trusted you like a brother." "I'm sorry," Tom cried, taking a step forward. "I don't know how this happened, honestly, I—" "Don't come near," roared the friend. He turned purple with anger, his fists clenched. "I can't stand the sight of you both." Emily sobbed, pressing her hands to her mouth. "David, forgive me," she sobbed. "And you too." David's voice rang with pain. "I see. Excellent." He turned and ran out into the corridor. Tom rushed after him. "Dave, stop, please." But David had already jumped out the door. There was a crash. He had slammed his fist into the wall of the entrance. Tom stood at the open door of the apartment, feeling the ground slipping away from under his feet. Far below, the front door to the street slammed. He felt sick with horror and shame. Behind him, in the bedroom, Emily was sobbing softly. Several minutes passed before Tom forced himself to turn back. Emily came out to him, tugging at her jacket. Her face was whiter than paper. "Tom, she began in a trembling voice. "You better go," he said quietly, without looking at her. Emily nodded, sniffling. Without saying goodbye, she ran out of the apartment, leaving Tom in silence. Tom sank slowly to the floor of the empty living room. Everything inside him collapsed. He realized that he had just destroyed two of his most precious connections with a close friend, and perhaps with a girl he had never dared to dream of loving. A burning shame and bitterness filled him to the brim. He clasped his head in his hands and whispered into the void. "What have I done?" In the days that followed, Tom tried in vain to make peace with David. He called, wrote long apologies, but his friend remained silent. Emily left town, transferred to another college. She was tormented by guilt, and she could not stand to see both boys. Only a few months later, David reluctantly spoke to Tom at a joint seminar. They agreed to forget about the past for the sake of their studies, and by graduation they had even outwardly established friendly relations. But the crack in trust did not go away. It was simply lurking deep in David's soul, biding its time. The following days turned into a difficult test for all three. Sarah moved in with her friend Lena, who, upon learning about what had happened, surrounded her with care. Sarah did not share any details, only that Tom had serious relationship problems and she needed time alone. Lena tactfully did not pester with questions, limiting herself to a quiet presence nearby, hot tea in the evenings, and an offer to go to a psychologist together. Meanwhile, Tom remained in an empty house, where every corner reminded him of Sarah. At first, he simply existed mechanically. He didn't eat, didn't sleep. He went out into the street and wandered around the neighborhood without meaning to, then came back and sat again, staring at the wall. At work, he took a day off, citing family circumstances. Colleagues sent messages with wishes for a quick solution to their problems. He didn't respond. Every night, Tom dialed Sarah's number on his phone, and each time he hung up, at a loss for words. He wrote her dozens of text messages, long, short, broken in the middle. He never sent anything. Only on the third day after the breakup did he dare to call. His heart was pounding, and it took an excruciatingly long time to pick up the phone. "Yes," Sarah's quiet voice finally came. Tom closed his eyes for a second in relief. She didn't throw it off. "Sarah, how are you?" "Normal," her tone was dismissive. I wanted to ask, maybe you need some things, clothes or—" "Lena brought me everything I needed," she interrupted. "I see," Tom trailed off, unsure of what to say. Thousands of words swirled around in his head about forgiveness, love, repentance, but none seemed enough. "I miss you so much," he finally whispered. There was silence on the line. Then Sarah answered in a muffled voice. "I don't know what to tell you, Tom. It's hard for me right now." "I understand," he said quickly. "I'm sorry. I won't push you." "Thank you," she said quietly. He could hear it in her voice. She was crying. It was heartbreaking. He wanted to rush to her immediately, but he understood. He had to give her time. "I'm willing to do anything to make amends," he said tightly. "I'll wait as long as it takes." Sarah was silent for a few seconds, then exhaled. "I have to go, Tom." "Yes, of course. Sorry to bother you." "Everything's fine," she paused a little and added, "Take care of yourself." The connection was lost. Tom lowered the phone. Her last words sounded in his head like a faint ray of hope. She still wished him well. That same evening, another man, David, called Sarah, sitting on the balcony of Lena's apartment, sighing heavily into the phone. After that night, he flew back to Los Angeles, but he couldn't stop trying to reach her. Sarah saw an unknown number from a Californian operator on the screen and guessed who it was. She didn't answer. He sent an email, a simple one, 2 sentences. "Forgive me. I was blind and selfish. If you can, forgive me." Sarah deleted the email without answering. Every time she thought about him, she felt a surge of anger and shame. It seemed to her that all the words he said to her were just part of a game. Even if it wasn't so, she didn't want David in her life anymore. After a week of living apart, Lena convinced Sarah to go to a family psychologist. At first, she brushed it off like, "What can I say? Everything is clear anyway." But her friend insisted, "You need to talk to a specialist, otherwise this pain will eat you up." In the end, Sarah agreed. She really couldn't turn down help. The cozy office, the soft chair opposite the friendly Dr. Cohen, a middle-aged wise woman, all this gradually had a favorable effect on Sarah. At first, Sarah had a hard time finding the words, but gradually they flowed. "I think I've stopped understanding myself," she admitted quietly. "I've done so much. Betrayed my husband, even though I love him. I don't know how to live with this." Dr. Cohen nodded, looking at her sympathetically through her glasses. "You are very hurt and ashamed of what happened. That is understandable. And what would you most like to change now?" Sarah thought, crumpling her handkerchief in her lap. "Probably myself. I want to stop going over everything in circles. Forgive myself, and him too. But I can't." "Do you feel angry? At your husband, at yourself?" Anger, resentment, and shame. All at once, Sarah closed her eyes tiredly. "I blame him for being blind to my feelings, but I also hate myself for doing this. We must both be terrible people." "You made mistakes, and so did your husband," the psychologist said gently. "But that doesn't make you terrible. It makes you human, capable of making mistakes. Now it's up to you to figure out whether you and he can learn from it and move on." Sarah wiped the tears from her eyelashes. "I really want to believe that we can, because I still love him. But how can I regain his trust? Is it possible?" "It's a long road," the doctor nodded. "But if both are ready to work, trust can be restored. The main thing is that you decide for yourselves whether you want to continue the relationship." Sarah sobbed, but there was determination in her voice. I want to, but I'm afraid that everything will happen again, that I won't be able to forget." Dr. Cohen smiled slightly. "Forgetting won't work, but understanding, accepting, and letting go quite possible. Over time, that's what you're trying for now." Sarah nodded, sitting up straight in her chair. "I'll try. For us," she said confidently. After this confession, she felt relief. She had spoken out, brought out what she was afraid to admit even to herself. Meanwhile, Tom also took steps to improve himself. On the fourth day of separation, having lost hope that his wife would return soon, he made an appointment with a psychotherapist. He realized that simply waiting was not enough. He needed to figure out why things had gone so far. At the very first session, Tom, barely sitting down in the chair opposite the therapist, breathed out in a labored sigh. "I ruined everything. With my stupidity, my blindness, I destroyed the marriage." The psychologist, a tall, gray-haired man, calmly asked, "Tell me more. What happened?" And Tom told her about his friend's long-ago betrayal, about how he thought the past was forgotten, about the recent nightmare. He was painfully ashamed, but he did not keep silent about anything. Not about his mistake with Emily, not about how distant he had become from his wife recently, not about the fight with David. When he fell silent, the therapist looked at him for a moment, studying him. "You have taken a lot of blame," he said finally. "Yes, your actions have led to serious consequences. But let's think about it. What do you want now?" Tom clasped his hands together. "To bring her back. If it's still possible, I'm ready to do anything to atone for my guilt before Sarah. That's commendable. But you don't know if your wife is ready for everything." Tom's chest tightened in pain. "I understand. Maybe she will never be able to forgive, and it will be deserved. But I still want to become better. Even if she leaves," his voice wavered, "I do not want to repeat the old mistakes. I do not want to be a person who is capable of hurting loved ones like that." The psychologist smiled slightly. "Well, that's a good start. We'll work in that direction." With each new meeting, Tom understood more and more deeply how his actions affected those around him. He talked about his shame for the incident with Emily, admitted his mistakes, learned how to not keep silent about problems in the future, but to solve them together with his wife. Little by little, the heavy burden of guilt ceased to be unbearable, it turned into an incentive to change. One day, about 2 weeks later, Sarah visited their house during the day, knowing that Tom would be away. She needed to pick up a few more things and some papers. Wandering through the empty rooms, she felt a strange cocktail of feelings, both longing for these walls and the pain of memories. Entering the bedroom, she froze in place. On her bedside table lay an old photograph, the same one with the 3 students. Next to it was an envelope with her name on it. With trembling fingers, Sarah opened it. Inside was a letter from Tom. Dear Sarah, I don't know if you'll find this letter, but I'm writing it anyway, hoping that one day you'll read it without my presence and understand everything that's on my mind. Every day without you, I replay our past in my head, from our first date to that sunny day when you said yes at the altar. You were the most beautiful bride in the world then, and I swore to make you happy. How bitter it is to realize that I broke that vow. You asked who Emily was. She was the girl to whom I owe our current misfortune. No, it was not her fault, it was me. Emily was David's first love, and many years ago, being a foolish youth, I gave in to temptation. We had a one-night stand. I knew I was doing something terrible, but I couldn't stop myself. David didn't find out right away, but he suspected. Emily confessed to him herself and left. We almost had a fight, and then we didn't talk for many months. I swore to myself that I would never betray a friend again. The years passed. David married not Emily. He was broken with her forever, but another woman, you know her, Catherine. It seemed to me that life had put everything in order. But apparently his wound had not healed. It was just waiting for the right moment. You know what happened next. I'm not making excuses for him. He destroyed my life, my family. But I bear some responsibility. If I could turn back time, I would never have made that mistake. And I certainly wouldn't have let you suffer. Sarah, I love you. I love you more than life itself. You are my everything, and you always will be. Every day without you is torture, but I will endure any punishment as long as everything is good for you. If you decide that you can't be with me, I will understand. But if there is even a small chance for a spark of trust, please let me know. I will do everything to earn it again. Always yours, even though you don't wait for me. Volume. As Sarah read these lines, tears streamed down her cheeks. She felt that every word was saturated with pain and sincere remorse. She had not seen this Tom open, honest to the point of confession, for a long time. Perhaps she had never seen him completely. She returned the letter to the envelope and mechanically put the photograph in her bag. It no longer caused her anger, only quiet sadness. With these feelings, she left the empty house. It had been about 3 weeks since the night their lives had been turned upside down. The cold month of November was drawing to a close. The city was bustling with Thanksgiving, but for Tom and Sarah, the holidays had lost all meaning. But inside them, the solution that all the talks with psychologists, all the sleepless nights and tears had led to was slowly brewing. They needed to try to talk. Sarah made the first move. After reading Tom's letter, she was restless for 2 days. Her husband's words pulled her back, echoing with pain and love. In the end, she dialed his number. Tom, hello. Sarah, his heart jumped. Hi. We need to meet, she said quietly. To talk. Yes, of course. Whenever you want, wherever you say. Tomorrow, in the park on the embankment, remember where we loved to walk in the fall. I remember, he whispered. Will 3 o'clock be okay? Yes. Thank you. Then see you tomorrow, she responded and hurried to end the conversation. The next day, Tom arrived early. The wind off the Hudson was chilly, and a fine sleet was falling. He waited at their favorite bench under a bare maple tree. He and Sarah had once fed the birds there. Now only crows cawed from the bare branches. Sarah arrived almost on time. She was wrapped in a long coat. A cashmere scarf hid her chin. Her face was pale, serious. They greeted each other with forced politeness, like old acquaintances who had not seen each other for years. For a few minutes, they simply walked side by side along the path, not daring to start a conversation. Sarah spoke first. I read your letter. Tom nodded cautiously. Thank you for reading. You wrote everything there, Very accurately, she continued. I appreciate your frankness. He glanced at her sideways. I thought you had the right to know everything. No more secrets. Sarah stopped and looked at him too. The dark circles under her eyes were almost gone, but sadness still lurked deep within. It's hard for us to talk, isn't it? She smiled with difficulty. To be honest, it's scary, Tom admitted. I'm afraid to say something wrong and lose you again. And I'm afraid that trust will never return, Sarah said quietly. They walked back to the bench and sat down. The wooden bench was cold and damp. The maple branches above them creaked loudly in the wind. Sarah shivered, and Tom quickly took off his coat, throwing it over her shoulders. She wanted to object, but said nothing, gratefully wrapping herself up. The rain had almost stopped, but the sky remained gray. You know, these weeks without you, they taught me a lot, Tom said, squeezing his intertwined fingers. I realized how often I was inattentive, how I took you for granted. I thought that everything was fine with us, but I withdrew into work. I have no forgiveness. Don't say that, Sarah sighed. I also bore my share of the blame. I shouldn't have kept silent about my grievance, but shared it with you, and especially not sought consolation elsewhere. She smiled bitterly, lowering her eyes. I never thought I could do this. Change. It was like it wasn't me. I brought you to this. Tom covered his face with his hands. With my indifference. Forgive me. Let's not blame ourselves or each other again, Sarah said softly. Everything is already mixed up. It's better. Let's decide what's going to happen to us next. Tom lowered his hands and looked at her seriously. I want to be with you, Tom said, his voice breaking. His eyes were shining with tears. No matter what. I know it will take us a long time to make up for what we did. I'm ready to go through any trials. If only you were here. Sarah nodded, feeling a lump rise in her throat. I want to try too, Tom. Without you, it's like a part of me died. But with you, it still hurts. A lot. I know, he whispered. I don't expect things to get better right away. I'll have to earn their trust again. Sarah looked into his eyes. Will you ever be able to forgive me? For what I? Her lips trembled. She did not finish speaking. Tom carefully touched her hand. It hurts, but I understand how it all happened. I am guilty before you too. I think if we both want to, we will forgive each other in time. Sarah squeezed his fingers a little tighter. I'm very sorry, Tom. Me too. They sat holding hands, sharing for the first time the same feeling, both grief and hope. Finally, Sarah straightened up and exhaled. I'm not sure I'm ready to go home for good. I still need a little more time. Of course, Tom nodded. As you say, I can stay for a while. Well, with my sister, for example. No, you don't have to go anywhere, she objected. This is your home. I'll stay with Lena for a while, and I'll come over little by little. Okay, let's take it slow, he agreed warmly. Sarah relaxed noticeably after these words. She had expected the conversation to be full of recriminations or tears, but instead she found herself feeling a little calm. As if everything had already been cried out and burned to the ground, the ashes remained, and they could be slowly swept away, clearing the way for something new. I'm very grateful to you that you also went to a psychologist, she said suddenly, remembering. Tom blinked in surprise. Where are you from? Lena said. Yes, Sarah nodded. She heard from your sister. I'm glad you're working on yourself. I go too, and I think we should go together later. Definitely, Tom agreed. Family therapy, I'm ready. They sat and talked for a long time about what they had experienced in these weeks, about what they wanted to achieve. The conversation was the most frank in all the years of their life together. By the time the wind brought the first snowflakes, Sarah felt that she was leaving the park a slightly different woman, wounded but not broken. Her husband walked next to her, also exhausted, guilty, but dear, and their hands were clasped again. Shall we go? Tom asked, holding her elbow as they reached the road. Sarah nodded. Take me to Lena? I'm not yet. Ready to spend the night together. Of course, dear. The word darling just came out of his mouth. Sarah noticed and squeezed his hand slightly, letting him know that she wasn't upset. Quite the contrary. They got into Tom's car and drove through the evening city, and snowflakes continued to circle over the noisy avenues, a symbol of the approaching new chapter in their lives. Sarah did not return home immediately. She stayed with Lena for another 2 weeks, gradually increasing her visits to her own home. Tom was initially nervous every time she arrived, but tried to behave naturally. He stopped trying to smooth things over with excessive servility. He realized that sincerity was more important to Sarah. They agreed to tell each other everything they felt, even if it was bitterness or doubt. Before Christmas, Sarah decided to come back for good. Tom didn't push her. She packed her bags and arrived one snowy evening. Tom greeted her with a quiet smile and hot cocoa, which filled the house with the scent of cinnamon. They hugged shyly in the hallway. For the first time in a long time, Sarah spent the night in their marital bedroom. Tom made clean new sheets and put away all the old things so that they would have a sense of renewal. That first night, they simply slept, huddled together, afraid to disturb the fragile world they were beginning to rebuild. In January, they began going to couples therapy together. On Wednesday nights, they would walk into Dr. Cohen's office hand in hand. There, they would openly discuss what had gone wrong and learn to communicate again. Tom admitted that he was still sometimes tormented by images of Sarah with another man. Sarah would tearfully tell him how scared she was that Tom would withdraw and distance himself again. The doctor helped them hear and understand each other. With each session, the pain would slowly recede into the background, and a timid trust would emerge in its place. Of course, not everything went smoothly. Sometimes Sarah would be overcome by sudden waves of jealousy or suspicion. If Tom stayed half an hour late at work or answered a question absent-mindedly, old fears would flare up in her head. Then she would tell him directly, "I'm having an attack of mistrust right now, help me." Tom would immediately put everything aside, hug her, and explain what exactly had delayed him. Sometimes he, too, would be burned by the stings of his imagination, but he would share, too, and Sarah, holding his hand tightly, would repeat, "I'm with you, I'm not going anywhere." They learned to be extremely honest, and this honesty became the basis for new intimacy. So, step by step, their life entered a peaceful channel. In their free time, they tried to pay more attention to each other. They cooked dinners together, read a book out loud in the evenings, went on short trips out of town on weekends just to change the scenery, to get new impressions together. On one such trip, it was early spring, they suddenly realized that they were laughing sincerely together as before. Sitting in a small restaurant by the lake, Sarah joked about their awkward boat ride. Tom supported the joke, and they laughed, clinging to each other. This laughter seemed to wash away the last traces of tension between them. Sarah put her wedding ring back on, which she had first taken off in a fit of anger. Now she wore it with special warmth. Tom noticed this and almost burst into tears. In the spring, their friends, Marco and Lena, came to visit them for the first time with their significant others. Sarah was worried that she might feel awkward, but the evening went wonderfully. Tom and Sarah behaved naturally, and the friends seemed happy to see that the couple was back together. No one asked any unnecessary questions. Everyone only knew that they had been going through a difficult period and tactfully avoided the topic. While the guests were sitting at the table, Sarah caught herself thinking that she had not thought about past troubles at all for about 10 minutes. She laughed at Marco's stories and felt that happiness had returned. One sunny May day, she and Tom were walking along the embankment, and Sarah suddenly stopped at the window of a children's store where a tiny bee costume was on display. Her lips involuntarily trembled. Tom followed her gaze and quietly asked, "Are you thinking the same thing as me?" Sarah nodded sheepishly. "I'm thinking that maybe soon we could. Well, try to have a baby." Tom hugged her carefully from behind. "I'm ready when you're ready, and I'll be happy if that happens." Sarah turned her face towards him, beaming with emotion. "Is it true?" "True," he smiled. "I've been thinking about it lately, too. I just didn't dare rush you." They bought that bee suit for the future and returned home holding the bag like a priceless trophy. an informal symbol of their hope for a new chapter. That summer, Tom and Sarah took a short trip around New England, a spontaneous decision, a mini-second honeymoon of sorts to replace the one they had been on for so long due to work. They wandered around Boston, ate lobster at a seaside cafe in Portland, and watched the sunset on the cliffs of Rhode Island. At night, they sat on the veranda of yet another hotel, hugging each other and whispering about everything under the sun, just like they had at the very beginning of their relationship. On one of those nights, they overcame the last of their fear and pain and shared marital intimacy for the first time in a long time. Their love was embodied in gentle touches under the starry sky, and this brought them closer together. The past sometimes still lingered as a light shadow in the soul, but with every smile, with every warm memory created anew, this shadow faded. In early autumn, when their marriage had passed its 6th year, Tom and Sarah decided to renew their vows. They went together to the very lake where Tom had once proposed to her, and at dawn, standing by the quiet, mirror-like water, they decided to renew their vows. Tom took Sarah by the hands and quietly, looking into her eyes, repeated the promises to love and cherish her always that he had made many years ago, and added new words born of trials. That he would never again hide a single secret from her, and would not miss a single chance to make her happy. Sarah could hardly hold back tears of joy as she answered him. She promised to love him all her life, to forgive and understand, to walk beside him no matter what happened. Their voices were drowned out in the morning silence, and it seemed as if nature itself was listening to this sacred moment. When the last words were spoken, they hugged each other tightly. It was a secret, intimate renewal of their union just for the two of them, and it seemed to both that their hearts had never been so close to each other. The following November was surprisingly clear and quiet. Tom and Sarah's house was filled with joyful excitement as they prepared for Thanksgiving, which they were going to celebrate with close friends. The dining room was decorated with autumn leaves and candles, and the delicious smell of roast turkey and pumpkin pie wafted from the kitchen. Sarah, wearing an apron, was taking a baking sheet with a pie out of the oven. Her cheeks were flushed with heat and excitement. Tom came up from behind, carefully hugged her as much as his wife's belly, which had rounded out in recent months, would allow, and whispered in her ear, "Be careful, Mom." Sarah smiled as she placed the baking sheet on the stand. "Everything is under control, Dad." They exchanged cheerful glances. This new reality, expecting a child, filled their lives with a special light. Luck had smiled on them back in late spring, and now Sarah was 4 months pregnant. They had decided to keep the news a secret from the wider circle for now, planning to announce it today on Thanksgiving Day when all their loved ones would be around. The doorbell rang. Tom went to open it. On the threshold stood Marco with his wife Lena, the namesake of Serena's friend. Behind them Lena, the friend, the same one who had sheltered Sarah in her difficult moment, together with her fiancé. Noisy greetings, hugs, jokes, the house came alive with voices. Sarah, beaming, invited everyone to the table. No one asked directly how they had managed to get through last year's drama. Everyone saw the happy eyes of the hosts of the house and understood that this was the main thing. The dinner was lively. Marco tried to grab a turkey leg right away, for which he received a playful slap on the back of the head from his wife, and the whole table burst into laughter. He did not stop talking during the meal, making everyone laugh with stories about his culinary failures, including the story of how he once forgot to defrost a turkey and started a small fire in the kitchen. Lena shared the latest gossip from the city. Tom, pouring non-alcoholic sparkling wine for Sarah and himself, they both temporarily gave up alcohol due to his wife's pregnancy, raised a toast. "Friends, today is a special Thanksgiving for Sarah and me. Last year, we almost lost each other, and if it weren't for the support of many of you, I doubt we would be sitting at the same table now. Thank you each and every one of you for being there, and thank you to fate for a second chance." The guests nodded approvingly, and some had tears of joy in their eyes. "And that's not all," Sarah added, exchanging a joyful glance with her husband. "Tom and I have some important news that we want to share today." She put her hand on her belly. Her friend Lena was the first to gasp, noticing the gesture, and the next moment a joyful buzz was heard from all sides. Really? Are you expecting a baby? Tom, not hiding his pride, hugged his wife by the shoulders. Yes, friends. By the beginning of summer, there will be 3 of us. Loud congratulations, laughter, the clink of glasses, joy filled the room. Marco loudly proclaimed that such an occasion should be celebrated in a special way, and now they would definitely have to gather more often as a training session before diapers and night shifts, which caused another burst of laughter. He announced that such a toast should be drunk standing up. Everyone stood up, and wishes for the health of the future baby and a happy family were heard. Sarah wiped away happy tears, clinging to her husband. When the emotions had subsided and the guests returned to their meal, Lena, a friend who was sitting next to Sarah, quietly asked, "Are you happy?" Sarah looked at her husband, who was leaning over Marco, laughing at another joke his friend had made. She looked at her friends around her, all smiling, genuinely happy for them. Soft music was playing in the background, candles flickering comfortably. She felt the baby move inside her, and warmth spread through her chest. "Yes," she answered her friend just as quietly. "Very." Later, while clearing the table after the guests had left, Tom suddenly stopped and said, "Oh yeah, I almost forgot. I got a letter last week." Sarah turned around. Tom was holding an unstamped envelope, apparently delivered personally to the mailbox. "From David," he explained calmly. Sarah froze with the plates in her hands. The name of the old friend had not been heard out loud in their house for a long time. Both decided not to reopen the wounds, especially since there had been no news from him for more than a year. "Have you read it?" she asked cautiously. "Yes," Tom nodded. "He writes that he understands how unforgivable his actions are. He says that the divorce from Catherine helped him realize a lot. He goes to a therapist, tries to start his life anew. He asks for forgiveness." "I see," Sarah looked down. "And how do you feel about this?" Tom came closer and looked into his wife's face. "You know, when I finished reading, I caught myself thinking that I don't hold a grudge anymore. Not against him, not against that story. It's all in the past. I have a present and a future now right here in front of me." He gently touched her belly and added, "I even wished him happiness a little." Sarah felt as if the last stone had been lifted from her soul. She smiled at her husband. "You are amazing." "No, I'm just trying to be better," Tom sighed. I answered him briefly. "I wrote that I forgive him, but I wouldn't like to resume communication. I think that's right." "Probably yes," she agreed. "Let everything be fine with him too, but separately from us." That evening, thousands of miles away in San Diego, California, David Harper closed his laptop after sending his apology. He didn't expect a response, but he felt a little better. The past year had changed a lot for him. David had attended support groups, tried to root out his bitterness and anger. He realized that revenge hadn't brought back the happiness he'd lost. It had only added pain to everyone. Deep down, David hoped that someday he'd find a way to earn the forgiveness of those he'd hurt and start a new life. They hugged. Through the window, they could see the dying lights of other people's windows and the distant skyscrapers of Manhattan. The night was calm. Sarah pressed herself against Tom and whispered, "Today, I thank God in my thoughts for you, and for our baby, and for everything in general, that we had enough strength." Tom kissed the top of her head. "And I thanked you. Many, many times. Do you think everything will be okay for us from now on?" she asked quietly. Tom looked thoughtfully into the distance and hugged his wife a little tighter. "You know, I'm sure. Because now we do everything together. We can handle any dark shadows of the past." Sarah raised her head, met the gaze of her beloved. In his eyes, she saw the reflection of lights and herself, smiling. She felt boundless love and trust. "Together," she repeated in a whisper and touched his lips with hers. Outside the window, the first snow was falling quietly, covering the ground with a soft white blanket, a symbol of purity and a new beginning. In this warm, cozy house, 2 people, having gone through pain and temptations, found themselves again together, hand in hand. and ahead of them was a long, happy life, which they would build day after day full of hope, love, and loyalty. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one.